Hello and welcome to Season 5, Episode 7 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop,
I'm Mark Bishop.
and we are, of course, reading Austin Freeman's Tolkien Dogmatics, Theology Through Mythology with the Maker of Middle-earth, and this time we are talking about The Fall. A very interesting chapter, but I say that every single time we talk about this book, as you're well aware, and most other books that we've read on the podcast. What do you think of this chapter before we get started in talking about what was actually in it?
Well, before I answer, did you like it?
I did, of course.
Oh, that was a surprise. Yeah, I mean it's well, I think this topic is always interesting. You know, when you
Mhm.
talk about fall being the fall from grace or original sin, um it fascinates me, and I think there's such an element of truth in it, whether you believe in it religiously or not. You know, like if you think
Mhm.
there's a religious origin or not, I think it's just so true that we're all sinners. You know, whatever your moral code is, nobody lives up 100% to their moral code unless
Mhm.
your moral code is total evil. And I think there is a way to live up to a total evil code. But even then, they may, you know, a totally evil person may have mercy occasionally, which would violate that code. So I don't know if anyone, I think since we're all fallible, that's an interesting
Mhm.
question. I believe that no one can live up to their a consistent moral code
Hmm.
at all times in every circumstance.
Interesting. I think I would agree with you.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, I think it's impossible for human beings to 100% be in line with their code. I agree.
yeah, because we're all sinners. We're all
Hmm.
weak. Not all the time,
Hmm.
but we're occasionally, at least occasionally weak. Some more so than others. Anyway, so moving right into it. So Tolkien, I think, and I was thinking about this. I think that the concept of the fall or original sin, especially as the author of this book describes, it seems like it's a fundamental part of Tolkien's writings, don't you think?
I would
Yeah,
agree. Yeah.
because it's such an important part of the story arc that you've
Hmm.
fallen from grace, you have to redeem yourself, you know, that you strive for perfection, but you're never going to reach perfection while you're alive, you know,
Hmm.
and that you're created to do more than you're actually doing. You know, I mean, I
Hmm.
think, and you'd think that would be a depressing concept, but it really is an inspirational concept. Is
Hmm.
that for two reasons? One, that we're all kind of in the same boat, that we all have these expectations, either from God or ourselves or others, and we all let ourselves or others down sometime or another in our lives. And it's the important thing is to keep striving and keep moving. Like Frodo going up that volcano in the Lord of the Rings that would last for 45 minutes of the movie.
Your
Just
favorite scene of the entire trilogy. I know you've loved it. You talk about it all the time whenever it happens. It's never as long as you say it is every time we watch it, but you love that scene.
you know, every time I watch this scene, I think of the brilliant show idea that I've had before. When I said I should be a TV television writer,
Hmm.
called Television Assassin. I've told you about that concept before. That
I
you'd
think
have
so. Yeah.
in the middle of somebody else's show, and a random scenario, the television assassin would come in and execute somebody from this other show, and then all of a sudden you'd be in the middle of a television assassin show, and how the assassin, you know, either gets away or doesn't or whatever. And so every time I see that, I'm just hoping that somebody assassinates Frodo and that Sam can carry the ring, and I'll be done with it. But anyway, which he ends up doing anyway, right? Because he ends up having to pick up the guy
Yes.
because Frodo won't let him actually borrow the ring to throw it in the pit. So he's
Hmm.
got to pick up the dude and carry him, who has the
Hmm.
ring on his finger, all the way up there. And finally, it gets done. Well, only through
Yes.
Gollum's divine not inspiration, but uh,
Influence, action,
yes, yes,
eucatastrophe
yes.
is the
You
word.
catastrophe. I don't like that word.
I like it. I like
Anyway,
it a lot.
so you know that the author talks about how Tolkien incorporates, specifically how he incorporates these types of paradigms, you know, and what we're talking about for those. I think everybody's kind of familiar with it, you know, like the Adam and Eve story that they were tempted in the Garden of Eden. There was a paradise where they were without sin, um, and then were tempted with the forbidden fruit, where God says it's such a human story. All right, you can have everything you want in this paradise, but just don't eat the apple. All right, don't eat any of the apples from the tree. So what are they going to do? They're going to eat the apple. And I always think it was funny how some people, and maybe even to this day, would say, well, it's the woman corrupted the man, but all you had to do is say, put the damn apple down. No, you're not. I'm not going to eat it, and you're not going to eat it either. This is paradise. Why are you talking to a snake? So I think there's plenty of blame to go around, and I think the snake was just having fun. I think there were actually two snakes. I think there's one snake that says those humans are so stupid, and the other snake says, oh, I don't think they're that stupid. He says, oh yeah, I bet you I can get them to eat the forbidden fruit just by suggesting it. And bam, that's the Bible according to Mark Bishop. There's a missing chapter in there. Anyway,
I'd like to see a Mark Bishop edition of the Bible. That would be a sight to see. You'd have none of the letters. All of the letters would be cut out. It would end immediately after Acts. You would have none of the letters.
That is not true. There would be more letters and some diary entries. Dear diary, I was in Capernaum and someone called me a bad name, and it made me sad. It's like I think the letters. Why are the letters in the Bible? They're clearly not the word of God, right? There's some guy writing a letter to people, and I think it's valuable and inspirational and all that stuff. But I guess you could say that about everything.
Yes, I didn't mean to get you started on this tangent.
Some human wrote it. It's always some human wrote it. So what is there divine inspiration? I don't know. That's one of my things anyway. So the recurring patterns of the fall. Well, the men fell in the first age. The angels fell. Akabelabeth. Who the heck is that anyway?
The Akalabeth. That is the section of the Silmarillion that talks about Numenor and its sinking under the ocean. Essentially,
okay.
It is literally the downfall of Numenor.
And then the elves have multiple falls as well, and I think don't they like go to war with each other? And,
yes.
And then you talk about Numenor, and then there's a rebellion of the Noldor. Occurs through Feanor's possessiveness. Remind me what the heck that is.
So Feanor, he's the guy who made the Silmarils, these gems made from the light of the trees that were crafted by the gods. And so he essentially says, I'm better than all the other elves. And the Noldor are essentially the few elves that, if I'm getting all my terms right, they're the ones who came over to Valinor, although they were in Middle Earth originally.
I'm now sorry I asked.
Yes.
All right. So then moving on, Sauron, which I've forgotten. I've never read the Silmarillion or how do you say that, the other stuff. But that Sauron was like a fallen angel, essentially.
Yes.
Kind of like a satanic character. He was, I guess, a good being. And I guess from Tolkien's point of view and from his writings, everything started out good. Is when they get separated from the God's will and doing good that they fall away, so to speak. But that Sauron actually repented for his misdeeds, but then fell again. He went to the dark side again, to use a Star Trek analogy.
Star Wars.
Oh yes, and did he truly repent, or was he faking it? I don't know.
So that's a good question. There's a couple stories, I think, of Sauron actually like pretending to repent. He pretended to repent for sure, and pretended to be a good guy when he was captured by the Númenóreans in the Second Age. So I don't think that's what that's referring to. But there was a period in the First Age when Morgoth, his master, was captured by the other Valar. And it's kind of alluded that, the rest of the Maiar, essentially gave up evil and turned to good for a period of time. And I think that's including, Sauron along with them, these lesser angels underneath Morgoth who used to follow him and they kind of turned back. But then, of course, he broke free and later chaos ensued.
Great. All right. Now, the author does mention that Tolkien points out an explicit difference between his legendarium and Christian mythology. Did you understand how there's a difference between them? I'm on page 156, and I didn't see much of a difference between, in theory, the fall. But I guess part of it has to do with the philosophical, theological concerns about people being created with some element of sin or imperfection, because according to Tolkien's writings, they were created perfectly, I guess, but then this kind of chaotic what's the guy's name? Morgoth or whatever.
Morgoth, yes.
Morgoth put in the bad music and went sideways or whatever. Do you
Mhm.
know what he's referring to there? That even Tolkien points out there's a difference between his mythologies.
So it seems like what he's saying here is that the fall of man in like actual Christian thought was purely the actions of mankind. You know, they chose to go against God, and it wasn't really dependent on Satan at all. But he's saying in the making of Middle Earth, evil entered the world in its creation
Hmm.
because they rebelled during the act of creation, during the song, and so evil was present from the very beginning because that is how it was created. And I think that's what he's talking about there.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
Now that you articulate it that way, I guess
Yeah,
that would be a big difference because in Christian
that'd be like, yeah.
theology, he created the heavens and earth and it's all
Mhm.
good, and then it was after the creation that the evil
Mhm.
woman connived to set us apart from God.
Yeah, it'd be like on the seventh day, instead of God resting, God was like usurped by Satan, and Satan introduced his own stuff into creation. And so I think that's what he's referencing there.
True. Yes. All right. And that is a significant difference.
Yes, that is true.
All right. So he starts with a discuss. Now we've discussed the fall. Okay. What are we
Mhm.
talking about the fall? That means, some sort of separation between these characters, or, in our world, us and God. So the first discussion is the fall of Satan. And, I like how the author, and of course Tolkien, talk about the nature of sin.
Mhm.
Um, and initially talking about, and Satan would be, I guess, very similar to the Morgoth character, and
Mhm.
also, I guess, very similar to the Sauron character too,
Mhm.
because Sauron was some sort of divine type creature, I guess. Well, he was not an
Yes,
elf, right? He was something. He was a Valar.
he was one of the Maiar, so one of the
Maiar.
lesser angelic
Yeah.
beings. Yes.
Sorry, I know we've discussed this. It's hard for me to keep. I have a strong resistance of with learning fake things,
Mm,
you know,
I'm
but
aware.
I do know a lot of Star Trek terminology, and that's all fake. Anyway, so this creator God, well, I guess with Satan, including an inevitable rebel bent towards worship of the self. And I think that's really at the story of Satan. That he almost wanted to worship himself as an equal to God, and
Mhm.
thought he was an equal and wanted to be a creator, and that would be similar to the Melkor character
Mhm.
uh, in the Tolkien story, correct?
Mhm. And it's interesting, like the idea of light there, I think is important because, in one instance he says, Melkor is named as Alkar, which means the radiant, and of course, another name for Satan and the devil, Lucifer, literally means light bearer in Latin. So I think there's
Yeah.
some sort of connection with, light and the desire to worship oneself, something in there, seems to have a kernel of truth there. It's interesting, it's that idea that, I know better than God, and so, I want to make my own plan, and that's sort of the stem of Satan's fall and turn away from grace, and same for Melkor.
Mhm. And then Tolkien has a definite theme of the characters that are evil, truly
Hmm.
evil or more evil, that as they progress further away from goodness and the creator's vision, they have a lessened existence, like a lessened physical existence. And although they retain a tremendous amount of power,
Hmm.
they become disembodied, I guess. Isn't that a fair statement?
I think so, and I think it kind of ties back to his idea about like a robot factory being less real than like an imagined castle. It's like because a castle is more in tune with God's actual creation, stones and wood and things like that. But a robot factory, a thing that makes things even farther from being, that's kind of what you're getting with these gods that turn away. They become less being because they're less in tune with God's plan. The less something is in tune with God's plan, the less it really exists because it's not an actual creation of God.
Hmm. Speaking of robot factories, I was reading an article today about a guy that helped create the AI
Mm.
stuff at Google. He's like in his 70s, and he recently quit Google so he
Hmm.
can talk more freely about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Like
Oh, interesting.
basically echoing, not to criticize Google, of course, because I'm sure he got very wealthy creating the Terminators, um, but to just talk about how more freely about how it's a dangerous thing. Speaking about robots, and of course, Elon Musk have been talking about that for over 10 years. But anyway, back to our story. So Melkor is really Morgoth. Morgoth is
Yes.
just a different name for him because instead of being the light bearer,
Hmm.
he becomes the black foe because of
Yes.
his separation from God, the creator. So he loses his light and becomes like a dark entity,
Hmm.
which is I don't know. Is there a parallel with Satan? I mean, he's the Dark Lord, I guess, of
Hmm.
the Netherworld, but
Well,
uh,
Satan just means adversary. So I think that's what we're getting that from. So it's not exactly the same thing as, darkness or
mhm.
black, but a similar idea.
Mhm. Is Beelzebub? Is that a name for Satan too?
Beelzebub, I'm not sure which names are separate demons and which are just other names
Oh,
for Satan, because, there's a lot of also just named demons
yeah,
in
like
the Bible and in Christian
Baba
theology.
Yaga. Baba Yaga.
Baba
Yeah,
Yaga, that
Baba
is that is
Yaga.
a Slavic folktale,
Uh,
not
that's
from the Bible.
but John Wick is a person that you send to kill the Baba Yaga.
Yes, thank you for that
From
insightful
the,
piece of
that's from
knowledge.
the that's from the first John Wick movie.
Mm.
The
Thank you for that.
boogeyman. The boogeyman. No, he is the person you send to kill the boogeyman. I just think that was brilliant um, dialogue in that movie.
Yes, I like that a lot. Thank you for
That,
sharing.
that that two sentences. All right. So Tolkien kind of, as the author says, kind of reimagines the narrative of Genesis. As we talked about, it's a little bit different because he has this kind of creation, and the creation process itself kind of gets perverted by this Melkor or Morgoth or
Hmm.
character, and but that the evil in the world and the bad guys of the story um reincarnate themselves, essentially the same bad stuff, just kind of keeps coming back, um which is similar to Christian theology about, you know basically the humans always fall prey to the same lures or same distractions, same
Hmm.
things that caused sin 500 years ago or 2000 years ago or 4000 years ago are the same things that are affecting us today, same concepts. And so he has that kind of recurring theme of, you may be able to have a period of goodness or prosperity, but that evil is always lurking there, and unless you stay vigilant, it's going to come back.
Hmm.
If
Exactly.
it almost always be through our own participation
Hmm.
and acquiescence, I guess you say.
Yeah, because it's not even like a case of like ignorance, even because I mean, going back to Christian theology, like we literally, the Israelites were given a set of 10 rules, and they could not
Mhm.
follow those 10 rules, and so it's like it's not a question of we just don't know better, or we never learn from our mistakes. It's like we know these things, but we
Mhm.
always still keep going back to the exact same things, over thousands and thousands of years.
I used to think that like the Israelites, like the old movie, The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, and they go out, he has all these plagues. They
Hmm.
were slaves, for all these, years, and they're mistreated and all that stuff. And then he has these plagues, or just these crazy, wild, divine events to get them freed, parts of Red Sea and all that stuff. So they make their escape, and they're out in the wilderness for a while. I mean, granted, it was more than a week or so, but uh, he goes up in the mountain, he comes back, and they're like worshiping a golden calf. And I always thought, come on, is that really going to happen? And then I look around in today's day and age, and what are we doing? We're doing like the same thing. We have this. We have even more information about and it's not even a brutal existence. And we're basically worshiping golden calves now, and we have all these celebrities, and
Hmm.
anyway.
I mean, even to like make it worse for us, somewhat in the Israelites' defense, back then, that you had more of an idea of like a, multiple gods existing at the same time. You just
Right,
worship one particular one. And so you could even sort of excuse them by saying, oh, well, the Red Sea and the plagues, yes, they were divine actions, just not the divine actions of this God. But
right.
here we are, in this day and age when, the vast majority of Christians do not believe in any other God except the God, and still we're doing the exact same things that the Israelites were doing.
Mm-hmm. And that's something. Anyway, well, it's a good segue into the original sin,
Yes.
concept of original sin, which, um, uh, basically that, in the Christian theory, and I don't know, dude, I don't really believe that there was a dude named Adam and there's a girl named Eve,
Mm.
and they're in the Garden of Eden and a snake. I think it's more of a really of a myth story, but I think it's true. But I guess perhaps what was there was a what's the name of Adam? What does that mean?
Adam, it means first or dirt, I believe. I think I've
Hmm.
looked it up depending on who you ask. But it is Hebrew, I believe, but I
That's
could be
not
wrong.
what I was thinking. I thought there was some reference to it. I thought it was apt description to you. Maybe I did think you were dirt. I don't
Thanks, Dad. I appreciate
know.
it.
No,
We could.
we'll look it up later. We'll
Hmm,
just look it up. We'll talk about it next time.
hmm.
So,
I mean,
you know,
I don't know if I don't know if I agree with you that there was no historical Adam. I do think
really?
Genesis is definitely a mythological story, but it's like, who was I talking about this with? And I was just thinking, and it kind of convinced me. It's like, well, I believe that Jesus really existed, and I believe that he was fully a dude and fully God, and I believe that he died and he went to hell and he rose from the dead after 3 days. And if you just keep going back from there, it's like, well, okay, so I know that Jesus lived and I know that he died and he resurrected. Okay, so then why don't I believe in an actual King David? If I'm believing in
Oh,
Jesus, I can
yeah,
also
there's a
believe in
King
King
David.
David and I could believe in
Uh,
stuff like that. Let's go
yeah,
before that. I could believe in Moses, I guess, because he directly leads to David, and I could believe in these plagues and these commandments. So, okay, well,
yeah.
what came before Moses? I can believe in Abraham. Okay, well, then I guess the flood, and I guess Adam and Eve. It's like if I can believe in one thing, why not just believe in all of it?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mhm. All right. I think we've covered the original sin concept, correct?
Yes,
Unless there's
I would
something
say so.
else you want to discuss on that. So then,
I
what's
did look
the
up
what's
the etymology of Adam, if you're interested.
yes? All right.
The first human it is derived from the noun Adama, meaning soil or earth. When used as a noun, it means man or humanity. Adam.
I thought there was some sort of linguistics reference.
Maybe we'll come across it later in the chapter.
I don't know. If I did, I probably circled it. All right. So, Tolkien's story of the fall of man in Middle Earth. So the first fall, I guess, or is there more than one fall? There's more than one fall, right?
There are multiple falls, yes.
Because and also what it is, I really enjoy about Tolkien's writings is the kind of like the a lot of the characters have this kind of longing for a world of the past that's better than the present. Like
Hmm.
Legolas recounting tales from a time before the world was quote gray end quote, or like Aragorn, seems to have had a dark past,
Hmm.
and that he's almost running away from that, or where they're leaving Lorien, to this world of winter. These kind of concepts that there is a better time in the past, and I think those they kind of echo a theory that there was a paradise before. There's some sort of fall and
Hmm.
intervening period of time.
I've been thinking about that idea, like especially from the point of view of like, medieval Europe and stuff like that. Because, long after the fall of Rome, humanity was much worse off than they were, in Rome for a good like 1,000 years or so. And it's like, because of course I'm taking a bunch of classics classes while I'm up here, and it's like, thinking about, the incredible things that the Romans built. And then you have these like illiterate schmucks, 300, 400 years after, who sure did some cool things here and there, but it was, the Dark Ages for a reason. You look around and you're seeing like the ruins of an incredible civilization that you know very little about except what's been passed down, maybe through your parents or whatever. And it's like, I feel like that's where a lot of the idea of sort of a golden age comes from, especially in like European writings. It's like, we can see very
Mm.
concrete examples of there was a civilized, much more civilized than us, people that were here, a few hundred years before us. Now all that they have is just literally crumbling around us, which I think is fascinating to think about.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And it's kind of like when we take a trip into like North St. Louis City, uh, where there were beautiful. These used to be beautiful buildings. We were just driving up there on Record Store Day, and
Yes.
we weren't even in North City. We were like Central Corridor, or even some sections of South City. And it's like, gosh, this was just a beautiful. You can tell that
Hmm.
beautiful architecture. They don't build buildings like that anymore. They don't even have the skills, probably, like to the stonemasons and all that stuff to do that at scale. We certainly don't have that to do at scale. There are still some artisans that can do it, but it of course it's a much smaller degree than what you're
Hmm.
referencing. Beautiful castles and aqueducts and all that stuff. Um, Yeah, I'm kind of thinking that the Dark Ages got a bad rap, though.
Yeah.
Because they were still building things. I mean, there's
Hmm.
still castles being built in some of these relatively smaller, what do you call them, little kingdoms.
Hmm.
And the what is it, the Byzantine, the Eastern church and Eastern, the Byzantine Empire lasted for what, another, after the fall of Rome, lasted another 1,200 years, I think.
That is true. That is true.
And so there it wasn't like all was lost. But
Hmm.
anywho, back to what we were talking about, which was what, the fall of man in Middle Earth.
Yes.
And so I like the discussion of this, because he mentions how there's a human impatience to order things by their own will, that leads to an increasing distance from God. And Tolkien's kind of story about men being a sub creator really articulates that kind of tendency to separate yourself from God by creating your own universe and trying to order it according to your own terms. And you hear that a lot when you discuss religion with people that are not religious,
Hmm.
as they are insisting that God follow their terms, like that
Hmm.
their preconditions for what is right and what is wrong, especially in today's day and age. It's hard. You see that people struggle with that, and then of course all of us struggle to a certain degree, because you have your own moral code, and if it's different from what is a standard concept of Christianity, you either have to not believe, or you have to kind of um, allow your will to be bent, I guess, to God's will.
Very true.
What are your thoughts of that?
I think I agree that it's this idea of I think people have always been very self-righteous, and I think it goes back to the same idea of why Satan fell in the first place, is this idea of I know better than God. I think we see that a lot, especially it's like because I think the most common argument that you see like against God's existence from atheists and stuff is like, well, if God exists, why do bad things happen? Why did this happen to me? And sure, that's like a valid complaint. It's we don't want bad things to happen to anybody, but I don't think that in and of itself proves that a God does not exist just because a bad thing happened to you. It's not. I think a lot of people, because we've become a very individualistic, I think, in the modern day. It's like, oh, everything's about me and what I want, and my own personal decisions, and it doesn't really matter how this affects the wider world. As long as I'm okay, then we could just keep going on. It's all about me. I think is what we really see a lot of the time.
The easiest and the easiest and most entertaining way to counter that argument is to say, well, obviously you're a sinner and you're being punished. And then they give you another example, and then of some pure child that's being
Hmm.
tortured or something. So, well, obviously that kid was a sinner. They have to maintain a straight face through the whole thing, which is really hard to do, but it's infuriating to them,
I
because
can imagine.
then they're like, well, how can you say that they're sinner? Well, how can you say that they're pure? I mean, you have no
Mhm.
moral code. Who's to decide? Obviously, God has decided this child needs to be punished. Anyway, I haven't. I'm not confessing to have done that before, but I'm not denying it either. Um, so anyway, back to our story. There's a reference to Andreth
Mhm.
uh, telling Galadriel's brother Finrod the legend of the primal sin. Is
Mhm.
that an important legend in
Yes,
this concept? And
I
have we
believe
already
every
discussed it?
single time this story has come up, this is the Authrbeth of Finrod and Andreth, the
Oh,
discussion of Finrod and Andreth.
this is two guys, the two people talking, and the elf
Yes, this
tells
is
the story.
and
I didn't know.
the human tells the story as well, and the human's telling the story here of the fall of humans.
Yes. All
Yes,
right. So that's what that was.
yes, a
Why
very.
do I miss that reference every time?
I don't know. You really struggle with that one.
I need to keep notes.
You are the one leading the discussion on this. I thought you were keeping
Yes.
notes.
I am. I've got notes in my head. So anywho, but moving along, it is the author's discussion of Tolkien's writings about Satan. I thought were really interesting, because he talks about Satan coming as a craftsman,
Hmm.
and awakening new desires in people, and being helpful at first.
Hmm.
But he's basically the Prince of Lies, echoing passages in the Bible. But the same thing is kind of true of Sauron, like where
Hmm.
he's kind of I mean, I'm trying to remember the books versus the movies, but like corrupting Saruman, about
Hmm.
we're gonna, you can rule, you can have more power, there's no
Hmm.
sense in not following me, and
Hmm.
you're gonna have power and whatever, and it kind of corrupts.
Hmm.
But first starts off as, yeah, I got an offer for you.
Well,
We
it's
we
that's
could
that's
create these
almost exactly what
forts.
happens. The story of Sauron and Morgoth are almost exactly the same. You hear about here in the beginning, and he comes as a craftsman. Morgoth does, and he says, this is good, and God is evil, and he's like banning you from his light, and I'm the true light. He's the darkness. That's exactly what Sauron does, almost word for word, to the Númenóreans, and that eventually leads to their downfall. They actually capture him. They were in war against him on Middle Earth, and then they capture him and they bring him, back to Numenor to keep him chained. And then eventually he talks his way up, saying, you guys have got the wrong guy. I'm innocent. I'm waging the war against the real evil, who is, Eru. And eventually they build temples to Sauron himself. And then there's the crafting of the rings and everything like that. Because he initially comes as a craftsman and he gives them a lot of help. And he says, here are these
Right.
very powerful things that I'm going to give you. And of course, it, goes on to hurt them in the end.
Yes. So the lesson is, if you're in war and you capture someone, you should execute them and don't let them speak to you. Right?
True, true.
Well, if they're Satan,
Yes, if
uh,
they're Satan,
don't
yes.
don't talk to them. Earmuffs, earmuffs. Can't, can't can't hear me. I can't hear you. Um. So what else we want to talk about Satan and this whole discussion here? I've got a whole bunch of stuff underlined and
Hmm.
highlighted. Um. But you kind of summarized it, didn't you? Or where,
Hmm.
that this either Satan or, the Satan type characters all come in really kind of a seduction and a manipulation, but like a voluntary
Hmm.
manipulation, like the human characters willingly go along with this, but it's a step by step process. Oh well, first we'll accept help, then he suggests, well, it's kind of like, why didn't God provide you with this food? Why
Hmm.
didn't God provide you with these tools? If God existed, he would have made life a lot
Hmm.
easier than this. And I'm the one doing it for you, and
Hmm.
God is not.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's
then it's some
especially pertinent there in relation to the Númenóreans, because they were granted, especially long life by God himself for helping to fight the war against, Morgoth in the first place.
Mhm.
But then when Sauron comes over, he says, you can kind of see, the island of eternal life that's, out west. Why doesn't God let you live there? If he really liked you, why didn't he just give you eternal life? He like gave you halfway, and that shows that he doesn't really love you. Go over there, and that's why, the Numenor essentially sinks, is because the Númenóreans that worship Sauron sail over to Valinor, heaven on earth, essentially, in the aims of essentially stealing their eternal life that they think is rightfully theirs and like forcing the gods to give it to them, which
Yeah,
is an interesting concept. It's that idea of, God should have given you more, and then therefore he is evil.
right. And it's just demanding to have everything, and
Yes.
the sense of entitlement, which are themes in human history. And so I think that's kind of why his stories are so compelling to us, even for non-religious people. There's this moral arc of it, and some elemental truth about human nature.
Hmm.
Always wanting more, always questioning the wisdom of God, and trying to put our place in the status of the moral authority of our own worlds,
Hmm.
which I think we all do.
Exactly.
I do that for sure all the time.
Absolutely.
Um, and what is this? Why does well, I guess I kind of know the answer, but Tolkien portrays the Satan figures as serpents or dragons. But I do like that he consistently says and describes, like even with Sauron, waiting for the ring, that these evil characters are patient, they have subtlety and an artfulness to their work, and I think that is so compelling when you really look at it, either in World World or in his stories. I really enjoy that. I think it's at the beginning of which movie is it where there's a narrator? Is it Galadriel that's narrating
Hmm.
the story of the ring, and how Sauron waited and
Hmm.
waited and waited until Gollum's buddy on his birthday found the ring at the after getting sucked in by the fish. You know what I'm talking about in the movie?
Yes. Yes. I know what you're talking about.
Are you familiar with the movie?
Yes, I'm very familiar with the movie. Thank you for
and
asking.
just the description of the evil being patient and just
Hmm.
growing slowly, and the people not paying attention and getting complacent, really. You
Hmm.
know,
Exactly.
what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I think that's very true. I think the more that we just assume that, evil's gone and we could just, ignore it, I think the more that evil continues to grow. I actually saw the Pope's Exorcist last night, which was a great
Did
movie
you?
about, yeah, it was really good. Very, very good. Very well done. Actually,
Is that
I
with
was,
Russell Crowe?
yes, I was expecting it to be like very critical of Catholicism and, church does awful things and things like that. Actually, the exact opposite. Very, very much in favor of Catholicism. There's one character, this doesn't really spoil it, but he's like a high up bishop in the Vatican. And he's basically saying, why do we even need exorcists anymore? We need to catch up with the times and we need to, these possessions aren't real. You're a scam. Essentially, he's like, we need to get this guy out of here, the Pope's exorcist. And he's, this kind of, conniving dude who's, clearly just ignoring the dangers that are very clearly in front of him. And so he's like one of the big I wouldn't say the major antagonist, but he's very much working against the protagonist in that movie.
Right, right.
Mhm.
And there's always those people. Like
Yes.
you're in a true quest. I guess he would be the well in some well, not really. I was gonna say it's kind of like a Boromir character, but Boromir wanted to take on the fight himself, I guess.
Hmm. Yes.
So who anyway, um, that that reminds me of like the of course I could go on many rants about the
Hmm.
Catholic hierarchy, but I was just reading a story. Now, I'm gonna be careful how I say, not that anybody listens to this. But I was reading a story about a controversial bishop in another state.
Hmm.
I'll tell you his name offline,
Hmm.
because he allowed some seminarian who had no business being a seminarian, accused of sexual misconduct, to remain in his
Yes.
diocese, and all the and
Hmm.
firing an investigator when he didn't like the conclusions, et cetera, et cetera. That guy, I was like, I remember that name. He was a Monsignor in St. Louis County when I
Really?
was a prosecutor, and he was running interference for a priest named Kuchar. So the
Hmm.
priest, and you can look up media reports on that guy.
Yeah.
He was convicted, and what was galling about the whole thing was that he was being prosecuted by an elected Catholic prosecutor who assigned it to a Catholic assistant prosecutor. He confessed to Catholic detectives. He also confessed, not in the confessional, to another priest. He confessed to a nun. They all testified because this guy didn't plead guilty.
Hmm.
He went to trial, and of course, the trial took forever to come to trial. So we're talking, well, a year and a half after the alleged incident where he's alleged to have molested a couple altar boys. And they allowed him to attend the trial under all those circumstances, wearing his collar and carrying a Bible and putting it on council table every day of the trial. And the guy who was running interference for him is now a bishop in this other state.
Wow.
Has all sorts of problems, but it's the same kind of problems,
Hmm.
right? And there's just something going on with all that, and it was very disheartening,
Hmm.
especially since the church paid for his defense, and they didn't just hire any schmuck. They hired Scott Rosenblum, which you may have heard of the gentleman, and the fee for it was probably in the range of six figures just for him to
Wow.
represent him at the trial after he confessed. He's dead to rights guilty,
Hmm.
and so the Catholic Church paid for his defense. I don't know why he wasn't excommunicated, let alone defrocked. But anyway,
Hmm.
so we're talking about sin and evil and corruption of people, and I just think that there's a lot of that going on in our church's hierarchy, where they convince themselves that they are reconciled with God after they sin and they say they're sorry, and then they fall again, much like
Hmm.
Tolkien would have, and it has had in all his stories. It's just very, very disheartening. But I
Yes.
have to check that movie out because I was wondering if it was going to be an effective portrayal, and I'm
Hmm.
curious about it. So anyway, back at where we were. Where were we? We were talking about oh yeah, a discussion of Saruman and
Hmm.
Wormtongue, and their type of manipulation, but it's always lies in persuasion and not like some sort of hypnotism or mind control. Although I guess, the way it's depicted in the movie with that King Theoden, it almost seems like he's under a spell, but really he's listening to that. I guess that's how it all started. He's being manipulated by this worm tongue, and it wasn't until that he banished this guy that he regained his health and sanity and all that kind of stuff. And I like that because it's similar to a Christian theology that while evil can persuade you, it's still your decision. You still have free will. You're still responsible for what you're doing. If you're hypnotized or you're under someone else's control, then you don't bear any responsibility for what happened or what you did, right?
Yes, exactly.
I guess you don't have any other comments about that.
I don't know. I like what you're saying. I mean, it's very much depicted as a possession, like in the movie, like Saruman is literally possessing Theoden's body. And I think there is an element of that in the books, and that, Saruman has literally infected his mind, and he sort of needs that pseudo exorcism with Gandalf to sort of force him out. But it's very much, in the books, it's described as, Wormtongue was his, trusted advisor for a very long time. Like, he literally relied on his words, and even though they were blatantly wrong and blatantly false, he fell into that trap, and that's sort of how Saruman got him. He made himself weak, essentially, and that enabled him to infect his mind.
All right, next section, inherited sin. So this is like the concept of corruption being passed down to all humans as a consequence of our first parents. I don't really would consider it inherited sin. I think it's just the nature of our being, and I think you almost have to have that kind of concept if you have free will. It's almost like if you don't have some well, I mean, it really is what it is. It's an ability to sin.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that capacity to sin, then you don't really have a capacity to do good either. You're just existing. And so there's always that theological, I mean, I shouldn't say always, there's that theological problem. How does God create a being? God is, all good. How does he create a being that has the capacity for evil, for sin? And so the concept of original sin is that, well, you have that capacity, and Adam and Eve made the choice, and so that kind of gets passed down. But I don't think it's appropriate to like blame Adam and Eve. I think it's really more of an explanation and like a first story of how we all do it. Don't you think?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I would definitely agree with you there. Because I don't think it's like something that's in our genes. It's not like a trait that is passed down literally physically, but it is, inherent within our souls, within our, being, because of the actions of Adam and Eve. Yes, I would agree with what you're saying.
Here's my reference to your name. That I misremembered it. So in this section, he talks about there might be a primitive Adamic tongue, like an original language of Adam and Eve that is derived from that original person. That's what I was thinking of.
Yes, I like what he has to say here. It's an interesting concept that's, not talked about too much because it's not entirely on topic here, but it's the idea of, do we have a native language, as people, as humans? Did we have, one language that was shared between all of us? And at some point, I would sort of say yes, not in that we have like one specific language, but we have specific aptitudes for language and specific constructions, and it's sort of the idea of a universal grammar between all people. I don't believe that there was one singular language that then split up into all of these very different ones, because we do kind of have records of or theories that there were certain unique language creation points throughout history just because of how completely unrelated certain languages are. So I don't think that there's literally one Adamic tongue, but I believe that we do have this similar propensity for language and similar universal structure for language in a way.
And kind of following through on that was that kind of like the thought that humans, because we're humans, can communicate differently with each other as opposed to other beings. And Tolkien talks about how Bilbo and Gollum understood one another better than hobbits have ever understood each other, ever understood other races, because of that shared background as hobbitses. And I would go further that they have this shared experience of having the ring. the burden of the ring, and the same
Well, I
thing
think
with
he means before Bilbo even had the ring, when he encountered him in the tunnels.
well, true. Yeah. They had a connection. They both liked riddles,
Very true. They did both like riddles. Good
and
job.
they both might like fish, but one liked it raw.
Yes.
Anyway, so the nature of fallen reality. So what about the origin of goodness and the reality, like the world being, and, if all things are created good, and there's no such thing as an evil being, how do evil beings get created? And so, there's a description of Tolkien's, Elrond stating forthrightly that nothing is evil in the beginning, not even Sauron.
Mm-hmm.
But once there's a separation from the God and the plan of God, then that's when it starts kind of creeping in incrementally. And am I getting that correct?
Yes, I would agree.
And then ultimately, the only goodness that Morgoth retained is the goodness of existence itself and not anything else, I guess. Because at some point he's just like pure evil, I guess, except for that he exists. And I thought I read somewhere like Tolkien was of the belief that God could not remove a being from existence. Am I remembering that right?
I think so. Oh, I think this was also when we were talking about, God cannot, erase a soul from existence.
Correct.
I think that's what, yeah. And so
Because
I
it's
think
like
it's
part of God, I guess,
Yeah. But he also says, like, outright, he says there's no such thing as evil being, which I think you mentioned earlier. Like, something
Correct.
existing itself is not inherently evil. It can never be inherently evil just for existing. And so this idea that, because all of existence is sort of an extension of God and God's creation, there has to be some, tiny little bit of good just in the fact that you exist. And I think that's a very important part of, both Christian thought and, sort of the Tolkien philosophy here.
And Tolkien's philosophy about the nature of evil, and this theory that all good can come from even evil. Where he mentions on page 170, indeed, the world may look very different from the heavenly perspective. Evil labors in vain only to prepare the way for good to arise, which is a real wild way to look at evil in the world. And that really all it is you're just preparing, kind of like my theory that, well, that it kind of was somewhat variation of the theory the kid needed torture because of the sins, but a little bit different, like that torture led to some greater good later, I guess.
Yeah.
That's a hard one for me to swallow, but certainly that's Tolkien's theory, and kind of like how he sets up his stories, these bad things that happen, like what's the Smaug,
yes,
takes over the mountain, the lonely mountain. Well, that was bad, but ultimately there's a redemption arc where they retake that, and there's a battle of fire armies where they become victorious in that battle, ultimately, when the eagles come in at the very end.
Well, it even leads to more good. It's mentioned in the Lord of the Rings that, Erebor is still standing at the time of the Lord of the Rings, and it's ruled by Dane Ironfoot, who's Thorin's cousin or whatever. And there's a bunch of battles in and around Erebor, and then Dale, which is the man city around there, and they're not able to take Erebor. Sauron isn't able to take Erebor, so it leads to further good in the future, even from there, because it still exists and it's still a stronghold against Sauron. So I think, the point that you're making can even be extended even further. At the time of Lord of the Rings, it's still a bastion of good.
Yes, it's a pleasant way to look at a world full of evil.
Yes,
is that we're just biding our time until the good reveals itself, I guess.
I mean, as a very devout Catholic, I mean, I think you're kind of, in Tolkien's view, you're kind of doing everything with the knowledge that, well, eventually it's going to be all right. Jesus is going to come back. We know that in Revelation. So in the end, evil cannot physically win. We know that good will win in the end.
And that I don't know if I ever shared this. I haven't said it in a long time. You probably heard me say it, but when there were difficulties, in our lives with your mother and I would say, look, remember, everything works out in the end for the bishop. And so we'd be in the middle of a poop storm or whatever, whatever's going on. We're just like, gosh, can you believe that this is happening? And I'd say, well, you know what? Everything works out in the end for the bishop. And so far, so good. Because, I mean, we got 4 kids, everybody's healthy and knocking on wood there. And, I mean, everybody has their troubles, but if you kind of keep that attitude, well, it's all going to work out in the end. you're able to kind of struggle through the hard times. And what's that one? Is it a country song that if you find yourself in hell, I just gotta see, find yourself in hell, you keep walking or something.
I don't know. I don't know what song you're talking about.
I'll play for you later. But
All right.
there's a country song. I think there's a rock version. A similar concept. If you find yourself in hell, just keep going.
Yeah.
You know, because that's the only way to get out of hell is to keep moving. Because otherwise, you sit in hell. You know, you got to keep moving. All right, that's a little advice from your father.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So then we're talking about. I think I already talked about that. The corruption, or
Yes.
Yeah, corruption. And then Tolkien distinguishes between the curse of death and the corruption of nature. You know, actually, I don't know that Tolkien really thinks that death is a curse, you know, because it releases you to reunite with God. But that evil, like corruption of nature, is an evil. And you see that all throughout his stories, like the bad things destroy living things, very much like Star Wars. You know, like that's why what's his face, that little hobbit-looking guy that trained Luke. What am I?
Yoda? You forgot Yoda's name?
I forgot Yoda's. Yes, I drew a blank on Yoda. There's a lot of fictional characters in this discussion. But he was on a plant planet because it had all this life, right?
Yes.
Before they introduced the concept of metachlorian and sort of whatever.
Yes.
It's horrible. It was a terrible device. Just ruined everything. It was supposed to be a spiritual thing, and now it's a measurable quantity of something in your bloodstream. You know what it is? And why can you inject that into me? And then I'm a Jedi? Anyway, so on to fallen humanity.
There's one thing I want to mention first that I think is very interesting. He brings up this point. You might have not noticed it, but it's the idea that it's the idea that the Earth itself, the world itself, becomes Morgoth's ring. He like pours all of this evil into it, and is talking about corruption of nature. It literally becomes his ring. In the same sense that Sauron poured his being into the ring, and for Sauron to be ultimately destroyed, you have to destroy the ring itself. So it's this idea of, if we want to get rid of evil entirely, you literally have to get rid of the world itself. And like, this idea of, because the physical world is so imbued with evil through Morgoth, and again through Satan, and other evil works and actual Christian theology. It's this idea if you want to live in a perfect world, it cannot be the physical world, because no matter what, there's always going to be evil in that, because it's imbued into the physical existence itself. Although being itself isn't inherently awful.
Thank you for that.
You have no thoughts on that. All right, moving on to fallen humanity, I suppose.
Well, I apologize. I just got a text that the alarm went off and the police were outside, and I didn't even know that.
Outside your office right now?
Well, let's see. A couple of minutes ago, my partner was here. Somebody set the alarm while we were still inside, and so the alarm went off. And anyway.
Well, it's not a very effective alarm if you're sitting in your office and did not notice it at all.
The alarm is not for me.
That's fair. It's to alert the police.
Others. There's a very, very loud siren goes off, and it's pointed at the sheriff's office, which is directly across the street from my office. And the Hillsborough police evidently showed up right away. Now, granted, I have my headphones on too. I'm on the outside of the building.
That is true.
So I'm sorry, I was a little distracted for a second, but I'm sure I didn't have any comment. Right. Now the concept of fallen humanity, which I've already talked about. It seems like he was a little repetitive in this chapter.
It was slightly repetitive, but yes.
So I don't know that I need to even discuss that.
All right. The fallen subcreation then.
Yes. What do we want to talk about that? I don't really have anything interesting to say about that, do I? Let's see what my notes say. What do you have to say about it? Oh, yeah. So the fall and subcreation. So we need a recovery, return, a renewal of health, and the regaining of a clear view in order to be, I guess, good people and that kind of stuff. And Tolkien certainly believed in fairy tales and fantasy can aid us in this process of renewal and recovery towards God's plan, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting idea, because it goes back to that idea of, what is more real and stuff like that. Because, his ideas on fantasy is it's, really illuminating universal theological truths about God in a way. If we're telling these myths and we're telling these stories, we're really talking about God directly. And I guess it's kind of tied back to that idea of, well, how better would you learn these truths? It's like, if you're just writing about the actual physical world, I don't think you're going to get any closer to God because the physical world sucks and there's evil everywhere. And so it's like, if you want to get at the real truth, you have to go past, you have to kind of put it in a veil. You have to sort of wrap these truths up in, in a story, in a fantasy world. And I really like that idea.
But then he concedes that mythology itself can become diseased like anything else made by humans. How do you know that the myth is a good myth and is drawing you closer to God, as opposed to something that is created by man in either a purposeful or inadvertent way to lead you astray? I don't know that you know that. I don't know that he knows.
That's a good point.
But well, he even goes on to say that fallen man creates fallen myths, false religions, and false gods, which I completely agree with. So it's kind of like, well, myths, but I guess the fundamental point he's making is that myths can bring you information and a reason to believe in God and closer to God's plan, although they can do the exact opposite too. I guess really the point is, which the first point is somewhat revolutionary. It's almost like you have to tell a false story to get to the truth, but because it's fiction, and that's what fiction is. And then, as the author points out, fantasy and the freedom of the will that enables it is an irremovable right of the human being as in the image of God. That's a pretty strong statement.
It is.
Because we're created by God to create. And I think that you would agree that Tolkien believes that kind of human artistic creation is really one of our highest callings, don't you think? Isn't that what
I would
Tolkien
absolutely agree.
Yeah.
And I agree that it's like in our nature, because I mean, I'm not sure if this is true for all children, but I know, me and, of course, my brothers, our favorite thing to do when we were little was to play pretend, is we would just like to make up stories, with our little toys. And, I would build, whole stories around Thomas the Train and stuff like that. So I think it's true. I think we do like to build stories, and we like to put ourselves in fictional worlds and just, imagine things like that. And that's why I think Tolkien is spot on there.
Yes. And and I think more Sam than you. I don't want to tell too many personal stories, but like, I'm trying to remember which one would get most aggravated when I would interject myself into the story. I think Jonah was okay with me participating in the story and having my own storylines, my own characters. But of course, I would tend to be a little bit more absurd, and I'd have a little bit more humor. I think maybe it was you.
Probably.
It's either you or Sam. Is like, no, like I could be nearby, but I could not say anything about the story because it would kind of like break the spell almost, like yeah, it's for sure you. I'm trying to think who was worse, but yeah, it was fun times though. You guys really get into it. And I think that's I mean, personally, I don't want to brag about my boys, that type of pretend play, I think it shows how intelligent people are. If you're able to create your own stories in your own world, in your own imagination, I think it's a clue that you might be a smart person. And I think that's what we all think about creative people, don't we?
Yeah.
Even if people can't do any math, we still say they're brilliant if they can create artistic things.
Very true.
We call them brilliant, smart, but they may not be able to do a simple algebra equation, but we think of them as brilliant people, brilliant artists. That's how we describe them. Anyway, dislocation of desires, the next section. Assuming we're done with the creative.
Yes.
Section.
We can move on.
And there's a long discussion about let's see, the dislocation of sexual desire, which to great damage of the soul and body for all involved. And it's kind of an Augustinian concept. And I don't know what I want to talk about that. Just talking about like, the sexual desires being self-indulgent, and there has to be a purpose, and that, humans have the ability to control that and resist temptation.
He uses this word. He says, it's not exactly sexual lust, it's concupiscence. This idea of, sort of just wanting to have whatever our most immediate desire is, whether that is, sexual or whether that's something else. But just, I think it's that immediate gratification thing. It's, he says, he goes on and he continues, if we really want to succeed, we have to deny those things. We have to deny that immediate gratification, sort of delaying the good for a later time is a very big theme throughout Tolkien's works.
I should have remembered that when I was in Farmington earlier this afternoon, because I really like Rally's cheeseburgers and French fries, and I know it's bad for me,
Hmm.
but I lusted for it, and in my weakness, I ate it. Now I regret it, somewhat. It's good fries. No, that's the same concept. The same concept, isn't it? That I should. I know it's not healthy for me, but I wanted that instant gratification. It was like a 42-ounce Coca-Cola. I don't know how many calories did I consume in like 15 minutes? Probably
Quite a
like
few.
probably 3,000.
Probably.
Um, so I'm guilty of that for sure. Other stuff, not so much. Um, and then there's a discussion about many of our fallen works are mixtures of good and evil, and many evils arise from good motives. And boy, that's the truth. Your desire to do good, you mix in, some um, um, arrogance, and maybe you want to be praised for doing good things, and you can end up doing bad things when
Hmm.
it's all said and done. And that's kind of a theme that goes through Tolkien's writing. Would you not agree?
I would absolutely agree. I mean, not to bring up Boromir again and again, but I
Yeah,
think he's a
correct.
very good example for a lot of these themes in here. Is his desire was to defend Gondor and to beat Sauron. And of course, he fell right into the ploy of temptations. So many
Yeah.
things throughout these stories are just I want to do good, I want to help my people, or I want to help myself, and of course that leads to evil and destruction. Almost inevitably, but there's always still good.
Mhm. Like when Pippin was looking at that globe thing,
Mm. Yeah, the
because he
Palantir.
the Palantir. Yeah,
Yes,
like
exactly.
a fool of a took.
Nope, fool of a took, but close enough.
Took.
Took, same thing.
No.
I'm very sorry.
Tomato, tomato. Well, yeah, there's a reference to Boromir.
Hmm.
Great being thinking of himself as a great captain, a just cause. Um, you already discussed the Numenorians fall through a love of beauty, and of course that their arrogance trying to, I guess, seize eternal life or a
Hmm.
longer life. And then I didn't remember from the book, but Gandalf being tempted to wrestle with Saruman and the Palantir.
Hmm. With Sauron and the Palantir.
Sauron. What did I say? Saruman?
You said Saruman, yes.
Oh, I meant Sauron.
Hmm.
Those names are very similar.
I apologize.
Um, so that, I mean, that, and then well, Sam also mentioned that Galadriel, if she wore the ring, she could make the bad pay for their deeds. Uh, and she agrees, but it would not stop there. Like
Hmm.
when she's tempted with the ring. Yes, I could punish the evil, but then it's not going to stop there. I'm
Hmm.
going to start punishing the people that are a little less evil,
Hmm.
and so on and so forth, until you're just punishing everybody.
Well, isn't that like the idea? You've talked about this on the podcast. Your friend maybe was back in college. His idea was just to cull like the worst 10% of society just at all times.
The 10% rule. It's
Yes.
not at all times, because you'd end up reducing the population too quickly.
Yes.
But he had intervals. But he certainly thought 10% off the top right away, or really off the bottom. And so we had a long discussion about how to define the 10% to cull.
Mm.
He had actually thought this well out, and it's been decades since we had this discussion, and it was just idle talk, of course.
Yes.
But he was talking about like the people that are net costs on society.
Mm.
It was primarily an economic
Yes.
discussion. So it's really utilitarian.
Which is
And
awful.
well, that's where atheists, if people don't value, have an unequal, an incomputable value to human life, you can easily slide down this theory,
Hmm.
which is let's take the bottom 10%, the least productive, the most costly people, and just eliminate them.
Hmm.
Because if you don't, because you can do the math, if you don't value the human life, if the way what it that it is beyond value,
Hmm.
if you put some number on it, then it makes sense to eliminate some of them,
Yeah.
and so that's that of course is what makes the entire discussion ridiculous, is because there is no way to measure or limit
Mhm.
the value of human beings.
But people have definitely tried. Of course, I mentioned I've been taking that historic trials class this semester. One of the trials is the Buck versus Bell, the eugenics case.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
that was a very, clear example of, well, we can mathematically prove who is the worst member of society. And this is back when, gene theory was first, really becoming popular, of course. And, we can
And ironic,
analyze.
and ironically, the people that were asserting that were the worst people.
Hmm.
Morally, and the value to society, they were the worst.
Hmm.
I would much rather be in the company of somebody that is, well, and you're not supposed to say it, mentally retarded, but I don't know what the proper term is, than some brilliant person that's espousing eugenics.
Hmm.
If God says, all right, pick one, the eugenicist or the retard in the corner, I'm going to kill the eugenicist
Yeah.
every time. Anyway, I interrupted your story. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, but it was the idea of, we can analyze, basically every bad trait, whether it's criminality or, insanity, just general vague terms, of course, but they thought they had it down to a science. And it's like, well, we can do this. But then the problem was, well, then they learned that you can pass on traits even if you don't display them yourself. So it's like, do we kill all of the carriers, even if, or not kill them, but castrate them, prevent them from having children, even if they don't exhibit symptoms themselves? And there are a lot of people who advocated for that, including maybe the most famous man to ever come out of Kirksville, Harry Laughlin, one of the biggest pro-eugenics people in the entire history of the world. And he went to my lovely school that I'm going to right now, Truman State University, not called that at that time, but he was pretty much, well, he wasn't a Kirksville native, but he lived here for a lot of his life. And that is one of our products of Kirksville, was Harry Laughlin.
Yeah, and the what we have now is de facto eugenics, is because people are finding out that their children in the uterus, in utero, have some sort of genetic problem, including Down syndrome, which you can do a blood test for. And obviously you used a bad term for them. I completely love all people that have that condition, and do pro bono work for an organization that helps. But anyways, just as a disclaimer, I was being stupid in using those terms. But
yes.
But you when I was growing up, you would see at church or at the store people with Down syndrome. It was a common occurrence, and now it is rare. I mean, it's really rare, and you don't, because you're too young to know. Because when I was, I was born in 1970, so I was a kid. I'm 6, 7 years old. Well, when did Roe versus Wade kick in? Was that 72, 73?
Yes, I believe so.
73, I think. So it really hadn't really been established until after that time. And so, so a lot of those people were, and then of course you had to have more effective testing in utero. And so, there are eugenicists today, but they aren't advocating it necessarily for a general population. They're just doing it to their own children. And it's wild.
True.
It's wild. We will be judged for that.
Yes. Moving on to the last section, unless you have anything else you want to say on that topic.
No, I think it's a good segue to the problem of orcs, because those people that would kill their own children are the modern day orcs. They're an evil race. They're an evil people. If you kill your own children, you are evil. And I am confident, even though I'm not supposed to be judgmental like this, I'm not supposed to pass judgment on people because I'm not God, they're all going to hell. So how do you like that? Anyway, back to the orcs. So are they inherently evil creatures? Well, there's a discussion of this, and of course they are beings, and so they have existence. And it seems like Tolkien really wrestled with this kind of plot device, or this kind of description of these orcs. Are they would God have permitted the creation of an evil race in reality, in the real world? And are the orcs an evil race that can do no good? Well, there's a statement here that, although orcs may be naturally bad, they're not irredeemably bad. I don't know, is there any evidence of that in his writings, that he actually had an orc do a good thing?
Not that I can think of, which is interesting, of course, because, it's because I don't know what the answer is here, because, of course, orcs are pretty much universally evil. They only serve, Sauron or Morgoth in all of the stories, or their own personal gain. But, I think it's a testament to Tolkien, as I think he is the only fantasy writer who would ever even think, okay, what is the theological significance of orcs? What impact does this have on God and free will and things like that? Any other fantasy author or any other author just in general would be like, okay, well, this is the bad race. This is the evil people. And I just like that Tolkien does ask these questions. What does it mean for the actual world itself? And I think it's a testament to him as an author.
Yeah, and there reminds me of a scene in I guess it's The Hobbit, where the elves had captured one of the orcs, and they're interrogating him. The king, what's the king's name? The guy with the long blonde hair. He's in a bunch of movies, but
Thranduil.
Thranduil cuts the guy's head off.
Mm-hmm.
He's still talking, basically. He's provoking him. But there was kind of a shock from the other two elves, or certainly the girl elf.
Yes.
What's her name?
Tauriel.
Tauriel.
Completely made up, by the way. This scene in Legolas is not in The Hobbit. Tauriel does not exist in any of Tolkien's writings. I just want to put that out there.
It reminds me of that kind of concept that, of course, he wasn't begging for mercy, but Tolkien was of the theory that, while they were naturally bad, I guess by their creation they were bad, they should still be given mercy if they begged, even if it's at a personal cost. So he has this moral code that even evil creatures should be given mercy if they ask for it.
Yeah.
And of course, Frodo denies the absolute wickedness of Gollum, but that was really somewhat after being questioned or discussing that with Gandalf, right? Gandalf's the first one to really suggest that
Bilbo had pity on him.
Bilbo had pity or mercy on him, and Frodo initially says, "Well, it's a shame," but then ultimately comes to the same conclusion that even though Gollum was a terrible creature, that he's not absolutely wicked and will still could still serve a good purpose in the world, and that kind of goes back to the theme of even bad people can end up with a good result for us as a whole, or as the story goes on.
Well, I think he summarizes it pretty well. He says there's no such thing for Tolkien as an evil race, at least in the sense that it is good for nothing more than extermination. He acknowledges that cultures can be more or less wicked, but not that we can write them off into damnation without also turning the judgment upon ourselves first. Since while these people may be evil, they might live in an evil society. We can't just exterminate them. They are good for something. They have being. They exist. There must be a purpose to their existence, and that's kind of where he ends the discussion there.
Yes, it's a good place to end this discussion of evil, sin, the fall, and original sin, and all that stuff.
Well, we'll be talking more about evil and sin next week. The chapter is titled "Evil and Sin," so this was more about the fall and evil as nature and things like that. But I'm sure we'll get into actual what constitutes evil actions next week.
I enjoy those kind of discussions.
Yes, I know you do well when the topic is evil and sin. your inherent pessimism and
cynicism.
What's the criticism, cynicism. Yeah, it lends itself well to the topic.
I'm an optimistic cynic.
What does that mean?
I see the bad in all things, but I'm hopeful of the good.
Oh, that's a nice thought. That's a very nice thought.
But my initial instinct is cynicism, that I don't believe people, and I think they have bad motives. That's my initial visceral or gut reaction, but then I'm optimistic that they could still be good.
That's lovely, Dad. All right, well, we're running out of time on this Zoom recording. We got locked out of your accounts. Now we're on my free account. We have like 4 minutes left. So do you have any final thoughts into this idea of sin and original sin in the fall?
No.
All right. Well, this has been season 5, episode 7 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
Still Mark Bishop.
And you can, of course, follow us on Twitter, like Austin Freeman did last week, at ULMTD Opinions to get updates on when the next episodes are live. Thank you for tuning in.